No one moved. Not the warriors. Not the healers. Not even the cub's own escorts. The little boy lay trembling on a narrow cot inside the war camp infirmary, his small chest rising and falling in uneven breaths as death crept closer with every passing second. The healers had already given up. One of them whispered that there was nothing more to be done, and then walked away, unable to watch. Then, a lone woman stepped through the crowd. Her dress was torn from days of travel. Mud stained the hem of her faded cloak. She wore no pack crest, no healer's sash, no family colors. Only the scent of rain, soaked pine, and wild lavender clung to her. The smell of someone who had walked very far with nothing but herself. The guards crossed their spears. They told her to stop, told her the cub belonged to the Northern Crown, told her she had no right to touch him. She looked at the child, and then she answered quietly that a child fighting for his life belongs to everyone. Without another word, she slipped between the guards, knelt beside the dying cub, placed one trembling hand against his burning forehead, closed her eyes, and gently kissed him. Across the camp, a single metallic sound rang out through the valley. The Alpha King had just dropped his spear. For the first time in years, fear crossed his face. Before we go any further into this story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. We would love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The wind had carried the smell of smoke long before Evelyn ever saw the camp. She had been following that scent since dawn, not because she was curious, but because beneath the smoke there was another smell hiding, one most wolves never learn to notice. Fever has its own language, and anyone who had spent years gathering herbs in forgotten forests eventually learns to read it. Rot carries one scent, infection carries another, but fever smells like wet stone after a summer rain, faint and easy to miss unless you have been taught to listen for it. Evelyn always noticed it. Her grandmother used to smile whenever she did, telling her she had been born to hear what pain could not say. Those words came back to her as she climbed the final hill before the camp came into view. Below her stretched the largest military encampment she had ever seen in her life. Hundreds of tents stretched across the valley floor. War banners snapped in the cold wind. Black armored warriors patrolled wooden barricades that had clearly been raised in haste. Smoke curled upward from dozens of cook fires into a gray, heavy afternoon sky. Something terrible had happened here, and not long ago. The wounded were everywhere, some crying out, others sitting in silence while healers wrapped bandages around deep claw wounds. This kingdom had survived a battle. Barely. Evelyn hesitated at the edge of the hill. She had no business walking into an Alpha King's war camp, and especially not after what had happened to her 6 days earlier. 6 days. That was all it had taken to destroy a life she once believed would last forever. She could still feel the cool night air beneath the moon tree of the Ashwood Pack, where her entire pack had gathered to witness her mating ceremony. Lanterns had glowed between the ancient branches. Children had laughed somewhere near the back of the crowd. Musicians had played softly under a full silver moon, and for one shining hour, Evelyn had believed this was the happiest night of her life. Then Damon arrived, her fated mate. He did not smile when he saw her. He did not even look at her properly. Instead, he laughed, a cold and cruel sound that carried easily over the hush of the gathered pack. He pointed at her in front of everyone she had ever known and asked if this weak Omega was supposed to be his moon goddess given gift. The crowd fell silent. Her father lowered his head. Her mother began crying before another word was spoken. Damon circled her slowly, the way a buyer circles livestock he has decided not to purchase, listing everything she lacked. No wolf strength, no awakened spirit, no healer's gift, no warrior's blood. And then the words that ended everything, the formal rejection spoken in front of the whole pack beneath the sacred tree. No one defended her that night, not one elder, not one childhood friend. Even the wolves who had shared meals with her since she was small found somewhere else to look. In a single moment, she became invisible to everyone she had ever loved. The next morning she left without a farewell, without anger, without even a destination in mind. She carried only the clothes on her back, a satchel of dried herbs, and a small silver pendant her grandmother had given her before passing away. A faded wolf was engraved into its surface, its meaning always a mystery. Her grandmother used to whisper that one day someone would recognize it before Evelyn ever did. She never understood those words. 3 days ago, she had almost thrown the pendant into a river out of grief, and something inside her had stopped her hand at the last moment. Now, standing outside the gates of the Northern King's camp, she touched the pendant again and felt it strangely warm against her palm. A scream cut through the camp. Someone shouted that he was getting worse, that the fever was spreading, that they were losing him. Evelyn did not think. She ran. 2 guards blocked the infirmary entrance the moment she reached it. They told her to halt, told her no civilians were permitted past this point, told her this was royal business. She tried to step around them, and one guard caught her wrist. Inside the tent, a child's painful cough echoed out into the open air, and every instinct in Evelyn's body screamed at her to help him. The older guard frowned and told her she did not understand, that the royal healers had already tried everything. She told him that meant they had tried the wrong things. The younger guard scoffed, asking if she thought she knew more than the king's own physicians. She said no. She thought they had simply forgotten something. When he asked what, she answered with a single word: hope. The guards exchanged a confused glance. The younger one laughed and said the cub was dying, that no herb could stop death itself. Evelyn looked him directly in the eyes and asked why, then was the boy still fighting? Neither guard had an answer. Inside the tent, the child cried out once more, weaker this time, barely audible. Evelyn pulled gently free of the guard's grip and told them that if she was wrong, she lost nothing, but if she was right, the boy would get another chance. For one brief moment, the older guard hesitated. His own grandson had died of fever years before, and he still remembered the helplessness of that night. His grip loosened, and that single second of doubt was all Evelyn needed. She slipped between them and disappeared into the infirmary. Neither guard chased after her, not because they had changed their minds, but because somewhere underneath their training, both of them desperately hoped she was right. The child lay motionless on the cot, his breathing dangerously shallow. As Evelyn reached out to touch his forehead, the silver pendant beneath her cloak began to glow with a pale blue light. Outside the tent, an armored rider thundered into camp, and every warrior in sight dropped immediately to one knee. Someone whispered in a voice tight with fear that the Alpha King had returned. The infirmary held the kind of silence that settles over a room moments before a death. Not the peaceful kind, but the heavy kind. Rows of wounded warriors turned their heads toward the stranger who had dared to walk inside, whispering questions to one another about who she was and how she had gotten past the guards. Evelyn ignored every stare. Her eyes never left the little cub. He looked younger than she had imagined, no older than 7, dark curls plastered to his forehead with fever sweat, his lips pale, tiny scratches across his hands, as if he had been fighting nightmares no one else could see. Beside him sat bowls of untouched medicine, bundles of unused herbs, empty cups, cold cloths, evidence of 3 days of failed attempts. An elderly healer stepped forward, exhaustion and irritation mixed in his voice as he asked what exactly she thought she was doing. She told him she was trying to save the boy. He laughed bitterly and said they had spent 3 days trying, that the fever refused every remedy, that it did not behave like anything natural. Evelyn knelt beside the cot without answering him. She closed her eyes and listened, not with her ears, but with everything her grandmother had ever taught her, the rhythm of his breathing, the pulse beneath his skin, the subtle scent rising off the fever itself. Her expression changed. This was not an ordinary fever, she told him. The healer folded his arms and asked what miraculous diagnosis she had discovered that 20 trained healers had somehow missed. She looked up and told him the boy had been poisoned. The room went still. One healer scoffed that there were no signs of poison anywhere on the child. Evelyn answered softly that the signs were there, simply hidden beneath the fever. She lifted the boy's wrist gently and pointed to faint silver lines beneath the skin that everyone had dismissed as discoloration. Moonshade venom, she told them, a poison that raises the body's temperature slowly until every healer believes they are fighting an illness, while the poison itself keeps spreading unseen. The old healer's confidence drained from his face as he leaned in and finally saw what he had missed for 3 days. The tent flap burst open and Commander Rowan strode in, his armor still streaked with mud from the battlefield, demanding to know what was happening. When he learned that a stranger, an Omega with no crest, no escort, and no permission, had claimed the prince was poisoned, his hand drifted to the sword at his hip. He asked who had allowed her inside. She told him no one had, that she knew she was trespassing, but that if she had waited for permission, the boy would already be dead. The commander's jaw tightened, because as much as he hated to admit it, she was not wrong. Evelyn opened the worn leather satchel at her side, revealing dozens of carefully wrapped herb bundles, each labeled in her grandmother's handwriting. She selected white willow bark, silver nettle, and wild fever moss, crushing them together with a smooth river stone while the old healer protested that those plants did not belong together. She told him they did, if you understood why. A sharp scent of fresh earth, rain, and mint filled the tent. Then she reached for a small glass vial of thick golden liquid, the last jar of forest honey her grandmother had ever made. When the healer asked if she would really waste it, she told him that if kindness could be wasted, it was never kindness to begin with. A single drop changed the color of the mixture entirely, and the medicine began to shimmer faintly beneath the candlelight. One healer admitted he had never seen a reaction like it. Evelyn told him quietly that it was because he had never mixed his herbs with compassion instead of desperation. Even Commander Rowan lowered his hand from his sword at those words. The child convulsed suddenly, his small body arching in pain. A healer cried out that he was crashing, reaching for more medicine, but Evelyn stopped them. He did not need more herbs, she told them. He needed something stronger. She dipped a cloth into the mixture and laid it gently across his burning forehead, brushing the damp curls from his eyes, and told the room softly that her grandmother used to tell frightened children the body listens to love before it listens to medicine. Some of the warriors thought she had lost her mind. Others felt an emotion they could not explain rising in their chests. She bent down, closed her eyes, and kissed the child's forehead, not as a healer, not as a mother, but as someone who refused to let another soul leave this world, believing no one cared whether he lived or died. The room fell utterly silent. Then the impossible happened. The silver veins beneath the boy's skin began to fade. Color slowly returned to his cheeks. His breathing deepened, one breath, then another, the fever that had burned for 3 days finally beginning to break. The old healer stumbled backward in disbelief. A nurse dropped the bowl she was carrying, and it shattered on the floor. A young warrior whispered through tears that he was getting better. Outside, a cold wind swept through the camp. Every horse grew restless. The ravens nesting along the wooden walls took flight all at once. Commander Rowan looked toward the entrance, his face draining of color, and said that he had arrived. Hoofbeats thundered across the valley, heavy and measured and unmistakably commanding. Every conversation outside the infirmary stopped instantly. Black banners lowered. Hundreds of soldiers dropped to one knee without a single order given, because none was needed. A rider approached through the center of camp atop a massive obsidian wolf, whose silver eyes scanned every corner with quiet intelligence. The man seated on its back wore dark armor etched with ancient runes, a cloak lined with thick white fur moving behind him like a living shadow, a long spear resting in his hand. Not merely a weapon, but a symbol of authority feared throughout the northern kingdoms. This was King Cashin Varon, the Alpha King whose victories had ended wars, whose judgments had united rival packs, whose heart, many believed, had turned to stone after losing his queen and young son years before. As he dismounted, he sensed something unusual in the air itself, something that felt different. He asked aloud why the scent of hope had returned to his camp. No one answered immediately. Commander Rowan stepped forward, bowed, and told him he needed to see this for himself. Cashin entered the infirmary, and the moment he crossed the threshold, his piercing silver eyes found Evelyn kneeling beside the cub. She looked up. For one heartbeat, neither of them spoke. Neither of them moved. Time itself seemed to hold its breath. Then Cashin looked at the boy. The child smiled weakly, the first smile anyone had seen from him in days. The Alpha King's fingers loosened around his spear, and the weapon slipped from his grasp, striking the ground with a sound that echoed through the entire camp. Every warrior present stared in disbelief, not because the king had dropped his spear, but because in 20 years of war, it had never happened before. Not once. Cashin's voice barely rose above a whisper as he asked her who she was. Before Evelyn could answer, the silver pendant beneath her cloak burst into brilliant blue light. Cashin's eyes widened. He took one slow step backward, and for the first time in decades, the Alpha King whispered a name he had sworn never to speak again. Lyra. The whisper barely escaped his lips, yet every warrior inside the infirmary heard it clearly. Commander Rowan slowly lifted his head. The elderly healer frowned. The nurses exchanged uneasy glances. No one had heard the Alpha King speak that name in nearly 15 years. Some believed Lyra had been his Luna. Others claimed she had been a gifted healer who died during the Blood Moon War. A few whispered an even stranger story, that she had disappeared carrying something so valuable that entire kingdoms had hunted for it. No one had ever dared to ask Cashin directly, because the king never spoke of the past. Until tonight, Evelyn stepped backward instinctively and told him he had mistaken her for someone else. Cashin said he knew exactly who she was not, but asked where she had gotten that pendant. Evelyn hesitated, every instinct warning her not to reveal too much, before admitting it had belonged to her grandmother. When he asked her grandmother's name, she answered quietly, Miriam. Cashin closed his eyes, and for the briefest moment, pain crossed his face, not anger, not fear, but grief, deep and ancient, the kind of grief that lingers after years of pretending it no longer hurts. He had never thought he would hear that name again. 15 years earlier, before the wars, before the throne had begun to feel like a prison, Cashin had been a young alpha prince, confident and restless, certain the world could still be fixed through courage alone. During a diplomatic journey into the eastern forests, he had been ambushed, not by wolves but by mercenaries. Poisoned, outnumbered, alone, he would have died beside a frozen river if an elderly healer had not found him there. Her name had been Miriam. She refused payment, refused titles, refused even to tell him where she lived. Instead, she gave him a small piece of advice that had followed him through every battle since. That power makes many people kneel, but kindness makes them stand. Before she left him, she had shown him a silver pendant identical to the one Evelyn now wore, and told him that if he ever saw that symbol again, he was to protect whoever carried it. At the time, he had not understood why. Standing in the infirmary tonight, he finally did. Commander Rowan stepped forward, respectfully suggesting this could all be coincidence, that they knew nothing about this woman, no pack, no witnesses, no history, no proof, and that for all anyone knew, she could have poisoned the prince herself. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Several warriors reached for their swords. Evelyn did not defend herself with anger. She simply asked Rowan that if she had wanted the boy dead, why would she have saved him? Rowan opened his mouth to answer and found he had nothing to say. A small voice interrupted the tension, telling everyone not to fight. The cub had opened his eyes, his cheeks regaining their color, exhausted but alive. The old healer nearly wept, saying it had actually worked. The boy smiled weakly at Evelyn and told her she had stayed, and she answered that she had promised she would. When he reached for her hand and their fingers touched, a faint silver glow surrounded both of them for the space of a single heartbeat before vanishing. Commander Rowan saw it. Cashin saw it. Every healer in the room saw it. The silence that followed was almost unbearable. The boy, confused by everyone's expressions, explained that he had been having a scary dream where he was alone, and then someone had kissed his forehead, and the darkness could no longer find him. A trumpet echoed through the camp, 3 sharp blasts followed by a longer, more desperate horn. A young soldier burst into the infirmary out of breath, reporting that the Western Watchtower scouts had found a woman, barely alive, who had spoken only 3 words before collapsing. "They're coming back." Outside, the peaceful atmosphere shattered. Warriors sprinted toward defensive positions. Archers climbed the wooden walls. Black wolves howled across the valley. The old healer quietly approached Evelyn and told her she had no idea what she had walked into. The poison she had removed from the prince's blood had not been seen in nearly 20 years, and the wolves who once used it had been believed extinct. Evelyn felt a chill travel down her spine as she remembered her grandmother's old warnings about Moonshade, that if it ever returned, the kingdom would lose far more than a throne, and that they would come looking for her. Cassian ordered the guards doubled, no one allowed to enter or leave the camp. He turned back to Evelyn and told her that until they understood why destiny had brought her here, she would remain under his protection. She told him she did not need protection. He looked toward the camp gates where alarm bells continued to ring and answered simply that she did not know who was hunting her. A cold wind swept through the valley, and for a split second the pendant beneath her cloak pulsed again, no longer blue, but crimson. Far beyond the mountains, a cloaked figure riding an enormous black wolf suddenly stopped in his tracks and smiled. "The pendant has awakened," he told the warriors behind him, ordering the hunters prepared. One by one, dozens of crimson eyes glowed beneath dark hoods in the darkness. Their search was finally over. If this story is making your heart race already, type "I'm still watching" in the comments, and let us know if you think Evelyn can trust the Alpha King, or if something far greater is waiting for her ahead. The infirmary had grown quiet again. Outside, soldiers hurried across the camp, reinforcing the wooden barricades, while black wolves patrolled the tree line. Inside, Commander Rowan stared at a sealed chest he had discovered hidden beneath the prince's bed, an ancient parchment bearing the royal crest resting in his trembling hands. Its edges were brittle with age. The royal wax seal had long since cracked, yet the handwriting remained unmistakably elegant. It belonged to Queen Lyra, the last Luna of the Northern Kingdom, the woman whose death had nearly destroyed the Alpha King. Rowan swallowed hard and told Cassian he needed to read this himself. The Alpha King accepted the parchment carefully, and the moment his eyes met the first line, the color drained from his face. His breathing slowed. No one dared interrupt him for several long seconds. He finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper, explaining that it had been written the night before the Queen disappeared. Rowan frowned, saying he had believed every letter from the Queen had been destroyed. So had Cassian. He unfolded the parchment fully and read aloud. The letter was addressed to her beloved Cassian, telling him that if it had reached his hands, fate had already chosen a path neither of them wished to walk. There would come a day when a rejected Omega, carrying the silver wolf pendant, would enter his life. She would not arrive as a queen. She would arrive as someone the world had forgotten. He was not to judge her by the name she carried, but by the lives she saved for she would awaken what Lyra herself had never been able to finish, the gift of the first Luna. Every healer in the room exchanged confused glances. The first Luna was an ancient legend, one most believed to be nothing more than a bedtime story told to frighten pups. The elderly healer stepped closer and asked Cashin's permission to take the letter, then turned to Evelyn and asked if she had ever heard the legend. She admitted her grandmother had rarely spoken of old myths. He told her sadly that it was because this particular one was never meant to survive. When the moon goddess first blessed the wolves, he explained there had been no Alpha and no Omega, only guardians, and the greatest among them had been a woman remembered simply as the first Luna. She possessed no extraordinary strength, no mighty claws, no unmatched speed. What made her different was compassion. She could calm fear with a single touch, ease suffering with kindness, and awaken courage inside hearts that had already surrendered. Commander Rowan crossed his arms and called it a pleasant story, nothing more. The old healer looked at him directly and asked him to explain, then, what had happened tonight. Rowan had no answer for that either. As everyone absorbed the weight of the Queen's letter, the little cub stirred and opened his eyes, weak but fully conscious, his gaze settling immediately on Evelyn with a bright smile. He told her he had dreamed about her before, that in his dream he had seen her standing beside his mother, the two of them smiling together, and that his mother had told him that when the woman wearing her pendant found him, he should follow her. Every heartbeat in the room seemed to stop. Cashin's voice cracked as he asked if the boy meant his mother, the queen who had died 15 years ago. The boy nodded, confused, and said that in his dream she had not seemed dead at all. Far beyond the camp, rain began to fall across the ancient pines. Hidden beneath heavy black cloaks, dozens of mounted riders emerged from the mist, each astride wolves nearly twice the size of ordinary beasts, their armor bearing no kingdom's crest, but only a crimson moon carved into black steel. At their front rode a man whose face remained hidden beneath his hood, his voice smooth, cold, and patient as he confirmed to his men that the pendant had awakened and that the girl had finally reached the Alpha King, which only made their search easier. He removed one leather glove to reveal a left hand covered in silver scars, eerily similar to the faded markings on Evelyn's pendant, and announced that it was time to finish what had begun 20 years earlier. Night settled fully over the camp. Rain tapped softly against the infirmary roof. Most had finally gone to rest, leaving only Cashin and Evelyn awake beneath the shelter of an old oak outside. For a long while neither of them spoke. Finally Cashin broke the silence, telling her he owed her the truth. His queen had not died from illness. She had been murdered. She had uncovered a conspiracy, a brotherhood hidden among the great packs that believed compassion made kingdoms weak and that only fear could unite wolves, and so they had silenced her. He had arrived too late and had buried an empty coffin because they had never found her body. Without warning, Evelyn's pendant grew warm in her hand, very warm, and the silver wolf engraved on its surface began to shift, lines she had never noticed before glowing beneath the metal, forming what looked like a map. Commander Rowan rushed from the infirmary at the commotion, and everyone gathered around as the glowing lines slowly arranged themselves into a clear image, a valley a crescent-shaped lake, 3 towering white mountains. The elderly healer recognized it immediately as the Valley of Echoes, a place abandoned decades ago because, as he reminded them grimly, everyone who had ever searched there had never returned. Before anyone could speak further, a loud explosion shook the camp. Flames erupted near the western gate. Soldiers shouted. Alarm bells rang wildly. Arrows streaked through the rain, one striking the wooden watchtower, another landing inside the infirmary itself, its shaft wrapped in a black ribbon. Cashin pulled it free and found a note written in crimson ink, demanding the bearer be returned by sunrise, or every child inside the camp would die. The room fell silent. Then one of the camp guards quietly stepped backward, too quietly. Commander Rowan noticed immediately and ordered him to stop, accusing him of acting nervous all evening, demanding he raise his hands. Instead, the guard lunged toward Evelyn with a hidden dagger. Before anyone else could react, the recovering cub threw himself in front of her, shouting no, and the blade flashed downward. The dagger stopped just inches from the child's heart, not because the attacker hesitated, but because an invisible silver light burst from Evelyn's outstretched hand, hurling the assassin backward across the infirmary and through a wooden table. The entire room stood in stunned silence. Evelyn stared down at her own glowing hands and whispered that she had not done that she had no idea what had just happened. Outside, far beyond the camp walls, the hooded leader of the Crimson Hunters watched the burst of silver light in the distance and smiled. There it is, he said quietly. The first Luna's gift had awakened. The silver light had exploded across the infirmary, striking the assassin like a charging beast, throwing his body backward through a heavy oak table before slamming him into the stone wall. The room shook, splintered wood scattered across the floor. Silence followed. Every eye turned toward Evelyn, who stood frozen, her hands still outstretched, the glow slowly fading from her fingertips, repeating that she had never done anything like that before in her life. The cub clung tightly to her cloak and whispered that he had known she would save him. Commander Rowan knelt beside the unconscious assassin, declaring that the blow should have killed him outright. The elderly healer felt for a pulse and found one, amazed that whatever power Evelyn had used had protected life instead of taking it. Cashin approached her slowly, his expression carrying neither fear nor suspicion, only certainty. His queen had been right. As the guards rolled the attacker onto his back and removed his torn cloak, Rowan noticed an unusual scar burned into the man's shoulder, a crimson moon split by a black claw. The old healer recoiled, recognizing the mark from the Blood Moon War. Cashin admitted they had defeated that army years ago, but had never found its leader. The assassin suddenly laughed, a slow and broken sound, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth, taunting Cashin that he still did not understand, that all his protection had done was deliver Evelyn exactly where their master wanted her. Before anyone could stop him, he bit down on something hidden beneath his tongue. A dark liquid spilled from his lips, and within seconds his breathing stopped. Rowan cursed under his breath. Poison. He had chosen death over speaking another word. Inside the dead man's pocket, The healer found a small leather pouch containing a black crystal unlike anything Evelyn had ever seen. The moment she looked at it, pain shot through her head, and a vision flashed before her eyes. A valley bathed in moonlight, white mountains surrounding an ancient lake, hundreds of wolves kneeling before a woman dressed in silver, wearing no crown, yet honored by every alpha present. Then the vision shifted to flames and screams. The same woman running through a forest carrying a newborn wrapped in white cloth, warriors beneath crimson banners riding behind her, an arrow striking her shoulder, another piercing the tree beside her, and still she kept running. Just before the vision faded, the woman looked directly at Evelyn and silently mouthed 3 words. "Protect the child." The vision vanished, and Evelyn staggered backward into Cashin's arms before she could fall. She described everything she had seen: the lake, the mountains, the woman, the child, the riders. The elderly healer whispered the name of the Valley of Echoes once more. The little boy quietly slipped from his bed, his strength returning faster than anyone expected, and walked toward Cashin. He admitted he had never told anyone that before he got sick, he had overheard 2 men talking, saying they could not kill him directly, so they had decided to make him disappear instead. When Rowan asked if he had recognized them, the boy nodded slowly and said one of them had worn their own armor. The room went cold. Someone inside the camp had helped the enemy. Cashin ordered every gate locked, declaring that no one would leave. The hunt had begun, not only for the Crimson Hunters beyond the walls, but for the traitor hiding among his own people. Later that night, after the rain had finally stopped, Evelyn sat alone outside the infirmary, staring into a fire, remembering every cruel word spoken on the night of her rejection. Worthless, weak, a burden. And yet today she had saved a prince, stopped an assassin, and seen memories that were not even her own. She wondered who she really was. Cashin's footsteps approached, and he sat beside her in silence for a long while before finally speaking, asking if she knew why he had dropped his spear earlier. He told her he had carried that spear through 23 battles, and it had never once left his hand, not even while wounded. But when he had seen her kiss that dying child, he had remembered something his queen had once told him, that the strongest ruler is not the one others fear, but the one who reminds them why life is worth protecting. Evelyn lowered her eyes and admitted she did not feel strong. Cashin told her gently that she felt compassionate instead, and that history often mistakes compassion for weakness until the moment it changes the world. For the first time since her rejection, Evelyn smiled a real smile, small, quiet, and hopeful. The peaceful moment shattered as bells rang wildly across the camp. Commander Rowan sprinted toward them shouting that they had found a traitor. 2 soldiers dragged a bound captain into the courtyard, a man who had served the Northern Kingdom faithfully for nearly 15 years. Cashin stared at him in disbelief, asking why. The captain laughed bitterly and told him he still did not see it, that Evelyn was never supposed to survive, that her entire bloodline should have ended 20 years earlier. He revealed that Miriam had not simply found her as an infant. Miriam had rescued her after her real mother died protecting her. The queen had not hidden a relic at all. She had hidden a daughter. Every person in the courtyard stood frozen. Cashin slowly turned to look at Evelyn as the truth settled over him completely. The letter, the pendant, the visions, the gift, all of it pointing to one impossible conclusion. Evelyn was not merely connected to the kingdom's greatest secret. She was the secret itself. Before Aldrin could say another word, an arrow flew out of the darkness and struck him squarely in the chest. He collapsed instantly. From beyond the camp walls, a deep horn echoed through the night. Once, twice, 3 times. Commander Rowan climbed the watchtower and looked out toward the forest, his face turning pale at what he saw. Thousands of crimson torches flickered between the trees. The Crimson Hunters had finally arrived, and at their center rode the hooded leader, holding a banner embroidered with a silver wolf. Cashin slowly drew his sword and told his people that tonight they would not fight for a kingdom. They would fight for hope itself. The first war horn rolled across the valley like distant thunder, low and ancient, and every conversation in the northern camp stopped at once. Every wolf lifted its head. Every warrior reached instinctively for a weapon. Commander Rowan climbed the western watchtower and felt his heart sink at the sight of thousands of crimson flames moving through the darkness in perfect formation, an army that had not come for land, treasure, or power, but for one single woman. Cashin fastened the clasp of his black cloak and swept his gaze across the frightened camp. He had seen many armies and buried too many friends, but tonight felt different, and his eyes settled on Evelyn standing beside young Stellan, her hand resting protectively on the boy's shoulder, terror on her face not for herself, but for everyone around her. She told him quietly that she had never wanted any of this. He answered that neither had his queen. The warriors gathered in the central courtyard, veterans beside boys who had barely seen 20 winters, fear written plainly on many faces. Cashin climbed the stone steps with his spear once again in hand, the same spear he had dropped only hours earlier, and looked out over every warrior, healer, servant, stable boy, and cook gathered below him. He told them that when he became their king, he had believed strength alone could protect this kingdom, and that he had been wrong. The strongest wall is not built from stone, he said. It is built from people who refuse to abandon one another. He turned toward Evelyn and told his people that tonight they protected more than one woman. They protected mercy. They protected hope. They protected the future. One by one, the warriors raised their swords. Then the healers raised their staffs. Then even the cooks lifted their carving knives, and the entire camp roared together for the north. The enemy stopped just beyond the tree-line. The hooded leader rode forward slowly atop an enormous black wolf with glowing crimson eyes, and when he finally removed his hood, gasps spread across the battlements. Commander Rowan whispered that it could not be. Cashin's grip tightened around his spear as he spoke a single name. Darius. The word struck harder than any blade, because Cashin had no brother that anyone knew of, or so they had believed. Darius looked older than the king. A silver scar stretched across one side of his face, his eyes the same piercing silver as Cashin's own, only far colder. He called Cashin brother, and told him he had clearly told his people nothing. Cashin answered that he had buried him 20 years ago. Darius laughed and said no. Cashin had only buried the man he used to be, before fixing his gaze on Evelyn and declaring that she belonged to him. Darius raised one gloved hand, and the Crimson Hunters lowered their weapons, allowing him to address the camp. Everyone knew the tale of the first Luna. He said, the legend of a woman who healed kingdoms. But no one had ever been told what her gift truly was. Her power did not heal. It awakened. It reminded wolves who they had been before hatred took hold. And that, he said, was exactly why it had to be destroyed, because compassion creates free people, while fear creates obedient ones. The camp fell silent, even the youngest soldiers understanding at once that this war had never been about magic at all. It had always been about control. Without warning, Darius lowered his hand and ordered his forces to take her. The forest exploded with movement as the Crimson Hunters poured from the trees like a wave. Arrows darkened the night sky. Rowan shouted for shields as the first volley struck the camp walls, splintering wood and toppling torches. Wolves leaped over broken barricades. Steel clashed against steel. The battle had begun. Cashin met the first attackers head-on, his spears spinning in controlled arcs that knocked enemies back without needless cruelty. Rowan fighting beside him like a living fortress while healers pulled the wounded to safety through the chaos. Evelyn tried again and again to step forward and help, but every time, soldiers formed a protective circle around her. She cried out that they were dying and that she needed to help them. Cashin glanced back only once and told her that they were fighting so that she could. Amid the chaos, young Stellan noticed a frightened messenger trapped beneath a burning wagon, and without thinking, he ran straight toward the flames. Evelyn screamed his name, but the boy ignored the danger entirely, grabbing the messenger's hand and refusing to leave him behind. The burning beam above them cracked, about to fall, and Evelyn's heart stopped as she sprinted forward. The pendant against her chest grew hotter than it ever had before, and the world around her seemed to slow as her grandmother's voice rose up inside her memory, telling her the gift was never meant to make her powerful, but to remind others that love is stronger than fear. Tears filled her eyes as she finally understood. The gift had never belonged to her alone. It moved through every act of selfless courage, through sacrifice, through compassion freely given. She reached both children just as the beam collapsed, instinctively spreading her arms as silver light erupted around them. The flames bent away. The falling timber froze inches above their heads, suspended in shimmering light. The entire battlefield stopped to stare, friend and enemy alike, because no one had ever seen power used this way before, not to destroy, but to protect. Darius watched from across the battlefield, drawing a long black blade etched with dark runes, declaring there would be no more armies, no more games, only the two of them. Cashin lowered his spear and told him he had mourned him for 20 years. Darius answered coldly that Cashin had mourned the wrong brother. The two alphas charged at one another, steel meeting steel in an impact that echoed across the valley, neither one yielding, every strike carrying years of grief, betrayal, and choices that could never be undone. As Cashin and Darius fought beneath the burning watchtower, the silver wolf pendant lifted from Evelyn's chest on its own, floating into the air as moonlight poured into it. Ancient symbols spread across the ground beneath her feet, and the earth itself began to tremble. Every wolf in the valley, friend and enemy alike, stopped fighting and turned toward her. One by one, in perfect unison, they lowered their heads. No one moved, not the northern warriors, not the crimson hunters, not even the wolves whose growls had shaken the battlefield moments earlier. The silver symbols beneath Evelyn's feet spread across the frozen ground like rivers of moonlight, weaving patterns older than any kingdom, and the wind that had carried smoke and blood through the night became strangely still. Commander Rowan lowered his sword, admitting he had never seen anything like it. The elderly healer whispered that no living wolf had. Cassian, still locked in combat with his brother, glanced over his shoulder and his breath caught in his throat. The legends were true. Evelyn stared at the glowing ground beneath her, unable to understand what was happening. The pendant rose from her neck and opened like the petals of a flower, revealing a tiny crystal glowing with soft white light. Her grandmother's voice echoed once more in her heart, reminding her that power given for yourself fades, but power given for others becomes eternal. Tears filled her eyes as she finally understood why Miriam had never taught her to seek greatness. The gift had never belonged to one person. It belonged to every act of kindness that inspired another. The crystal dissolved into streams of silver light that flowed into her hands, across her arms, around her heart, her torn traveling cloak transforming into flowing robes woven with silver thread that caught the moonlight, her simple boots becoming soft white and embroidered with ancient wolf symbols, her hair lifting gently in the wind as if the night itself wished to honor her. There was no crown, only light, because true leadership needed no ornament. A crimson hunter charged toward her with his axe raised high, but before he reached her, the silver light expanded and simply touched him instead of striking him. The warrior froze, his face twisting in confusion as memories flooded his mind, his daughter laughing beside a stream, his wife placing bread on their table, his father teaching him to carve wood, memories he had buried beneath years of violence. He fell to his knees and asked what he had become. Another hunter lowered his sword, then another. Within moments, dozens of crimson soldiers stood motionless, their weapons falling into the snow one after another. The battlefield was transforming, not because an army had been defeated, but because hearts were waking up. Rowan whispered that she was ending the war without destroying the people in it. Across the battlefield, Darius roared in fury, shoving Cassian backward with tremendous force and shouting that he was supposed to fear him. Cassian steadied himself and answered simply that he had feared losing his brother instead. Darius hesitated for just a heartbeat. Cassian lowered his spear and told him he had searched for his body, mourned him, built a monument where he believed he had died, and never stopped looking. Pain flickered across Darius's face as he admitted that they had left him to rot, that he had been told Cassian abandoned him, that the throne mattered more to his brother than blood ever would. Cassian shook his head slowly and told him he had never stopped looking. For the first time in decades, the rage inside Darius wavered. Before another word could be spoken, a black arrow flew from deep within the forest straight toward Darius. Cassian reacted instantly, throwing his own spear to intercept it midair, both weapons shattering on impact. Hidden among the trees, a cloaked figure cursed, and several crimson hunters attempted to flee. The elderly healer gasped, realizing they had never truly been following Darius. They had been using him. The fleeing figures wore a different symbol beneath their cloaks entirely. Not the crimson moon, but a black serpent coiled around a crown. Darius stared after them in disbelief, insisting they had promised him they were saving the kingdom. Cassian answered quietly that he had never been their king. He had only ever been their weapon. The truth struck harder than any blade. The years of hatred, the war, the suffering, all of it manipulated from the shadows by people who profited from endless conflict. Darius slowly dropped his sword, his voice breaking as he admitted he had destroyed everything that he had believed them. He told Cassian to finish it. Every warrior watching expected the final blow. Instead, the Alpha King extended his hand and told his brother to come home. The battlefield fell completely silent. Darius stared at the offered hand, his eyes filling with tears, saying he did not deserve forgiveness. Cassian answered that none of them earned mercy. It was simply given. For several long seconds, Darius only stared, and then, with trembling fingers, he reached forward, and the two brothers clasped hands while every warrior around them lowered their weapons completely. The war ended not with an execution, but with reconciliation. The moonlight slowly faded. The silver symbols disappeared from the earth. Evelyn looked around in disbelief at a battlefield that had transformed entirely. The wounded were being treated. Enemies were helping heal former enemies. Children emerged from hiding places throughout the camp. The valley that had echoed with screams only moments before now held only quiet sobs of relief. Cassian walked toward Evelyn slowly, deliberately, every step heavy with meaning. When he reached her, he removed the royal wolf clasp from his own cloak. Every commander watched. Every healer watched. Every child watched. Then the Alpha King, the undefeated ruler of the Northern Kingdom, went down on one knee. A collective gasp swept through the valley. Commander Rowan lowered his head. The old healer smiled through tears. Young Stellan grinned from ear to ear. Cassian looked up at Evelyn, not as a ruler, not as a king, but as a man whose entire life had just been changed, and told her steadily that she had arrived wearing no crest, no title, no army, that the world had called her weak, but tonight she had reminded every soul present that compassion is the greatest strength any kingdom can possess. He placed the royal wolf clasp gently into her hands and told her that whether she accepted a throne or refused one, whether she walked beside him or chose another path entirely, no one would ever call her worthless again. Tears streamed down Evelyn's face. For the first time since the night of her rejection, she truly believed she belonged somewhere. As the first rays of dawn broke over the valley, the clouds parted, bathing the battlefield in golden light. A single white wolf, larger than any living wolf anyone had ever seen, appeared silently on the ridge above them, looking directly at Evelyn, then at Cassian, before lifting its head and howling into the morning sky. Every wolf in the valley answered. The elderly healer fell to his knees, his voice trembling with awe as he declared that the moon goddess had given her blessing. Cassian slowly rose to his feet and looked into Evelyn's eyes, knowing there was one question left that would shape the future of the entire kingdom. A question that could only be asked now that peace had finally returned. The first rays of dawn spilled fully across the Valley of Echoes, washing away the shadows of battle. The smoke that had darkened the sky through the night lifted slowly, revealing snow-capped mountains glowing with golden light. Where swords had clashed only hours before, Northern soldiers and former Crimson Hunters now worked side by side, rebuilding broken barricades, carrying the wounded to safety, healers moving from warrior to warrior without ever asking which side anyone had fought on. Evelyn watched in silence, remembering that only yesterday these people had been enemies, and today they had chosen mercy over revenge instead. The elderly healer stood beside her and reminded her of something her grandmother used to say, that the greatest victory is the one where tomorrow's children no longer need to remember yesterday's war. At last, she understood completely. Inside the great hall of the northern fortress, every commander, elder, healer, and village representative gathered together. Cassian stood before the throne that had symbolized power for generations, and today represented responsibility instead. He removed his crown. The hall fell silent. Rowan addressed him uncertainly, but Cassian raised his hand and told them that for too long this kingdom had measured strength by conquest, and that it ended today. He placed the crown upon the throne itself and announced that every village destroyed by war would be rebuilt, that no child would go hungry while their granaries remained full, that no healer would ever again be denied training because of rank, and that no Omega would be judged by status before character. Murmurs spread through the hall before turning to applause that grew louder until the entire chamber stood in agreement. And Cassian looked toward Evelyn and told them all that this kingdom had learned its greatest lesson from someone it once would have ignored entirely. In the castle courtyard, Darius stood beneath the great oak, his wrists no longer bound. Instead of imprisonment, Cassian had ordered him to help rebuild every village the war had destroyed. Rowan questioned the decision quietly, reminding his king that many would say Darius deserved punishment. Cassian agreed they were right, but told him that punishment alone could never heal a kingdom, and that every home Darius helped rebuild would remind him of what hatred had once destroyed. Darius lowered his head and wept openly for the first time in decades, not from defeat, but from genuine remorse. Young Stellan approached carrying a small wooden hammer, telling him that his mother always said people could build better things after making terrible mistakes, and asked if he would help them. Darius could barely speak as he agreed that he would. Several weeks later, Evelyn asked to visit the Ashwood Pack, not for revenge, but for closure. Cassian rode beside her, and Commander Rowan insisted on accompanying them both. When they reached the familiar moon tree, the entire pack gathered in the same clearing where she had once stood rejected before all of them. This time, silence filled the space differently. Her former mate, Damon, stepped forward, all of his old arrogance gone, his shoulders bent, his confidence vanished. He admitted he had heard what happened, that he had judged her worth by her title instead of her heart, and that he had regretted it every single day since. Evelyn smiled gently, not in triumph, but in genuine kindness, and told him she had forgiven him long before he ever asked. The words struck him harder than any punishment could have. Several of the younger wolves began to cry. The pack elder stepped forward and admitted they had failed her. Evelyn looked around at the gathering and told them no, that they had taught her something instead, that rejection can become the road leading us to where we truly belong. Even the elder lowered his head at her words. As spring arrived, flowers bloomed throughout the northern kingdom, and peace settled over the land properly for the first time in years. Children once frightened by war now played freely in village squares. One evening, Cashin asked Evelyn to walk with him to the hill overlooking the Valley of Echoes, the same valley where everything had changed for both of them. The setting sun painted the sky in gold and violet as they stood together in comfortable silence. Finally, Cashin spoke, admitting he had once believed his life ended the day he lost Lyra. Evelyn gently squeezed his hand and told him he had honored her by protecting what she believed in. He smiled and told her she had reminded him that healing does not erase love. It simply teaches the heart to love again. He reached into his cloak, not for a royal jewel or a golden crown, but for Miriam's restored silver pendant, its crystal now glowing softly beneath the polished surface. Cashin knelt, not because tradition demanded it, but because respect did. He looked into her eyes and told her she had taught a king that kindness is courage, taught a kingdom that compassion is strength, and taught him personally that hope can return even after unbearable loss. He opened the pendant to reveal a simple silver ring engraved with two wolves walking side by side beneath a crescent moon, and asked her to walk beside him, not as someone standing behind a throne, but as his equal. Tears filled Evelyn's eyes as she remembered the lonely road she had walked after her rejection, the nights spent sleeping beneath cold trees, the pain, the fear, the uncertainty, every single step somehow leading her here. She smiled through her happy tears and said yes. A cheer erupted behind them. Commander Rowan laughed louder than anyone in the crowd. Stellan ran forward, nearly tackling both of them in his excitement. The bells of the northern kingdom rang until sunset, not because a king had found a queen, but because two people had chosen to lead with humility instead of pride. A year later, the northern kingdom had changed in ways few could have imagined. Healing schools welcomed every wolf willing to learn, regardless of birth. Pack laws now protected omegas from discrimination across every territory. Former enemies served side by side on the King's Council. Every spring, families gathered in the Valley of Echoes, not to celebrate a victory, but to celebrate peace itself. At the center of the celebration stood a statue, not of a king, not of a warrior, but of a young woman kneeling beside a frightened child, gently kissing his forehead. Its inscription read that the greatest power is the courage to care when others choose not to. Children often asked why the woman in the statue wore no crown, and parents always answered the same way. Because the greatest leaders are recognized by their hearts, not by their crowns. Years later, an elderly Evelyn sat beneath the same moon tree where she had once been rejected, surrounded by young healers eager to learn everything she could teach them. One little girl asked her what had made her become the first Luna. Evelyn smiled softly and told her that she had not become the first Luna because she possessed some great gift. She had become worthy of the gift the moment she chose kindness when bitterness would have been so much easier. The children sat quietly as she looked toward the distant mountains where the sun was beginning to set, and she told them never to let someone else's opinion decide their value. That the world may overlook a compassionate heart, but compassion always finds a way to change the world anyway. If this story touched your heart tonight, tell us in the comments what your favorite moment was, and let us know honestly, if you had been standing in Evelyn's place that day, would you have risked everything to save a child no one else believed could survive? We would love to hear your thoughts and where you're watching from. If you enjoy uplifting stories filled with courage, redemption, mystery, and unforgettable characters, do not forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next cinematic werewolf romance. And remember, sometimes the greatest miracles do not begin with power. They begin with one simple act of kindness.